All right. So today I was thinking about talking about Luke Musgrave and more importantly, the meta. And again, I've talked about this before in the past, but it's how we view strategy for fantasy football, and how we're competing against everybody else in this consensus that we come to about how to attack uh, winning the league, and we end up doing all the same things. And the problem when we come down to everybody trying to do the same things is like it turns into chaos. There isn't an actual strategy to winning. It's the analogy of crabs in a bucket all trying to pull each other down, and you're not doing anything to figure out a better way to build a mousetrap to pull yourself out of the bucket. You're relying on just getting lucky that you can pull yourself out before somebody else pulls you back down. So in the case of tight ends, the consensus is, oh, you got to have Travis Kelsey, who turns 34 in October. And if you don't have Travis Kelsey, well, you got to go get Mark Andrews because he's the next best thing. He's the number one in the offense for the Ravens. And if you don't have Mark Andrews, well, then TJ Hawkinson, because like that's going to be a high value or high volume passing offense, and he's going to be the one, number two there. So like, might as well get him. And then after that, like take a flyer on Darren Waller being the number one with the Giants. But the consensus is, well, Darren Waller's old and he's been injured, and Danny Dimes isn't good. So then after you get to that, you start getting into that tight end wasteland. Kyle Pitts is hurt. George Kittle's going to be a weapon amongst other good weapons in San Francisco. Goddard is going to be the number 3 in Philadelphia. Fryersmuth may be the number 1. He may be the number 3. Evan Ingram's is a gadget player on a very good Jacksonville offense. Njoku's probably not going to be the number 1, and that's if Deshaun Watson can be good. And then after you get out of the top 10, like Cole Kmet, we can come up with narratives for everybody, and that's kind of the issue. So one of the narratives is that rookie tight ends just don't produce. Like you're looking at year 3, maybe year 2 rookie tight ends. Well, we have to deconstruct, and I hate the word deconstruct, but you have to deconstruct the reason why rookie tight ends usually aren't good. Because remember, a couple of years ago, Kyle Pitts was a high value tight end. He just didn't have the touchdowns. He did go over 1,000 yards receiving. There were some reasons behind it. Matt Ryan was washed, so like he did have the draft capital. He did go to a fairly okay situation. He did kind of produce, but he didn't have a good quarterback. So, we don't want to overpay for a guy to be in the tight end wasteland. We want to pay correctly or underpay for a guy who's going to be able to at least compete with the subgroup below Travis Kelsey, or allow us to go get a guy later that gives us the flexibility to draft other positions earlier in the draft. So when we look at a Luke Musgrave, what that gives us is the ability to, as I pull up the Packers, gives us the ability to possibly project a guy who could, if not lead his team in receiving, at least be able to compete with the guys in the tight end wasteland. And last year we see that, like, to get that top 10 type tight end, we're going to be looking at about like 700 yards receiving and a handful of touchdowns. I'll just say 6. And if we had 700 yards receiving and 6 touchdowns, we're really getting into that Mark Andrews type area. If not, so it's bottom end top 5 is what we can look at, and that's not counting for injuries. But like, it's a pretty low bar to think about hitting a top 10 tight end, 700 yards receiving, and 6 touchdowns. It's a pretty low bar. So the reason why I bring up Aaron Rodgers is because last year Aaron Rodgers wasn't particularly good. It's not how the offense was designed, because they had young players at the wide receiver position that we already know about. There may have been some other issues going on behind the scenes between Aaron Rodgers, the coaching staff, and the front office. He may not have been checked in, but roughly 3,600 yards or 3,700 yards, 26 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. and he's not a big rusher anymore. It is a fairly good understanding that like Jordan Love's bar this coming season is not particularly high. Like Rodgers did not set a bar that was so high that Jordan Love can't go out and get. And I understand Jordan Love is not a rusher. He was not a rusher at Utah State. So Aaron Rodgers' stat line, we can look at and say apples to apples is going to be Jordan Love's stat line. He doesn't have to be that much better or worse than what Aaron Rodgers did last year. So then when we look at this coming season with the guys that are on the Packers, Aaron Jones is 29. He's more than likely going to be the centerpiece of the offense. He does have a chance to lead the team in receiving and rushing. It just depends. I think AJ Dillon will be in there a lot because I think they're going to slow the game down. They're not going to try and have their offense get in shootouts. Christian Watson is probably a very high end wide receiver too. There's certain parts that he's not good at, the quote unquote possession type routes. That's just not who he is. Doesn't have the greatest hands in the world. He's a long strider. You want to get him out in space with the football and let him be a better athlete than people. That does not translate into high volume. And when you look at him last year, under Aaron Rodgers, here's a guy that like topped out at 8 targets last year with Aaron Rodgers. So from a pure apples to apples perspective, like his route tree, what they're going to ask him to do is be limited. He may get to around 10 touches a game. Not all of those are going to be in the receiving game. And then Romeo Doubs, who I think is going to take a massive step up this year, probably be closer to 1,000-yard receiving. And that's probably where Christian Washington is, even though Christian Washington is probably going to flirt with 10 touchdowns. Doubs is probably going to be closer to 6. Jaden Reed is slotted in to be the slot guy. That's all fine and dandy. What we're looking at is a very not good but not bad Packers offense coming into this year. So the question with Luke Musgrave is how high is his ceiling? Well, his ceiling is he could lead the Packers in receptions, yards, and touchdowns. That's how simple it is, because once they drafted him, they slotted him as the rookie tight end, or as the starting tight end, and that's just where he is. He's like 6'6", 250, 4'6", 40. The reason why he dropped in the draft is because of injury concerns at Oregon State. So why we would be looking at Luke Musgrave is because like on Underdog, he's going outside of draftable range for the most part. He's tight end 22. You look at ESPN, he's tight end 31. He should be drafted in all leagues. And this goes back to the meta, and I tell people, I've been telling people for years, you should be looking to walk out of the draft with 2 tight ends and 2 quarterbacks, because at the end of your draft, the only guys that really have that huge upside are going to be the positions that everybody else does not like. People, quote unquote, the meta is going to be to drive the value of wide receivers and running backs up more than they're actually valued. And I can just take a guy, as a dart throw, like look at ESPN right here with Rondale Moore going at 109. Rondale Moore has absolutely no chance to win your league. Let me walk that back a second. The range of outcomes for Rondale Moore to do anything more than clog your roster up is very narrow. Yes, he could be the wide receiver 1 overall and the fantasy MVP. It could happen. Anything could happen. But how do we tell the story to get Rondale Moore to be the wide receiver 1? Well, it doesn't. Chances are Rondale Moore isn't even going to be the wide receiver 2 on his team, let alone the wide receiver 1 on his team. So it's like, well, why is he there? Why is DJ Chark there? Why is Darnell Mooney here? Why are they even ranked on ESPN? Like, the guys that have value are the guys that can get you to a point to win your league, and the guys that are on the bottom of your roster are the guys that we're going to churn off and get rid of. So in terms of Luke Musgrave, like, what are the odds that he can get up to about 700 yards receiving and 6 touchdowns? He's the starting tight end for the Green Bay Packers on a team that does not have a number 1 receiver that is going to command volume. Even if that receiver is a big play guy, there are going to be weeks where Christian Watson, and we can pull him up just like last year, there's going to be weeks where Christian Watson goes 4 for 46 without any touchdowns. It's just kind of how he's built. They're going to give him 6 to 8 targets, maybe a couple carries, And there are going to be weeks where he goes off and he puts up 4 for 107, 3 touchdowns. That's going to happen. That's his range of outcomes. That's the type of guy that he is in this offense. There's going to be other weeks where he does 1 for 11. And there might have been other issues behind the championship game. I think he was injured because I didn't play him in my championship. But, like there are other weeks. There are reasons behind it. I like Christian Watson. I think that he is a very solid wide receiver 2 this year. He's going to burn you some weeks. He's going to win you some other weeks. But the question is, who's going to be the guy that the Packers go to week in and week out? Well, we already know that from the preseason because they're designing plays to go to Luke Musgrave. When it's 3rd and 6 and they need to run a slant, they're not going to do that with Christian Watson. They're going to do that with Luke Musgrave. They might do it with Romeo Doubs. They might run some type of route out of the backfield with Aaron Jones, but it's not going to be Christian Watson that gets a lot of these quote unquote possession type of plays. And those possession type of plays are going to be the things that move your guy from being a okay draft pick to a league winner. And since Luke Musgrave right now is going outside of the range of draftability in a lot of places, he's a guy that you can get relatively cheap in your draft to sit at the bottom of your bench and go, hey, is this weird talking head on the internet have any idea what he's talking about? The other thing is the guys in your league who subscribe to the idea that they should not be drafting 2 quarterbacks or 2 tight ends are going to go, I don't want to draft this guy so late. There's only going to be a handful of guys in your league that's going to be looking at a guy like a Luke Musgrave in the first place. And it's going to be a guy that's listening to some obscure podcast on the internet and going like, well, where should I value Luke Musgrave? Well, if we're looking at these guys, the tight ends that are coming out this year, like the main predictor of being able to say, hey, is this tight end worth it? Is he going to be the number 1 or number 2 on a passing on a team? And right now with Luke Musgrave, we can say almost with certainty that, yeah, he's going to be the number 1 or number 2. So now this should vault him up, if not into the top 10, very close to it. And now we're in draftability range. So since he should be basically inside the top 130, or, if you want to project that out to like a 12-team league, it's just easier for me to do the math. Like, if we're sitting there and we're looking at where Luke Musgrave should be, he should be up here close to where Dalton Kincaid is at the very least. Like, is he going to be the number 1 or number 2? They're not going to have a high volume passing offense, so he really does need to be a little bit higher up there when it comes to his target share to be in the mix. But like, you're getting into the point where it's like, well, is the range of outcome for Luke Musgrave to be better than David Njoku or Evan Ingram there? And yeah, like you're getting very close to saying like Luke Musgrave already projects to be a top 10 tight end. But if he gets a little bit more, just a little bit more, and I to bring up the scoring leaders from last year, like how close is he going to be to 86 receptions, 900 yards and 6 touchdowns? That's what TJ Hawkinson did last year. And considering that Kittle's numbers are down because of injuries, just like Mark Andrews, and there are other weapons in the San Francisco offense. George Kittle is not the number 1 anymore, and other reasons for Mark Andrews' stats to be down last year. Like it's how high we can project Luke Musgrave up, because the other thing is like part of the reason why rookie tight ends don't perform isn't because they're bad at football. It's the reality of it is for them to be put in an opportunity where they're going to be getting 90% of the snaps, because that's what Luke Musgrave looks like he's going to get. And he's going to be operating detached from the line of scrimmage in the slot. We've already seen that in the preseason. And he's going to be potentially used out wide. Like if you didn't watch the Giants game with Derek Waller, where they actually flexed him out as a split end, and then he just was like abusing cornerbacks. Like these are the things that we're looking at as a tight end. And a guy like Luke Musgrave is a guy that's going so low in my draft that like there's only going to be 1 or 2 other guys in my league that would even be thinking of picking him up. Like right now, I'm really considering him being my starting tight end, let alone I have to draft this guy because the range of outcomes for him being able to compete as either a top 5 tight end, if not like a league winning tight end, the tea leaves are there. And if I wait until the end of the season and I go, well, I shouldn't draft 2 tight ends, or I shouldn't draft 2 rookie tight ends, if those things if I don't look at it that way, I'm going to lose my league, because a guy like this has so little risk for me to draft him and just find out in week 1 that he's splitting snaps and he's only getting like 3 targets a game. I can get rid of him for nothing. But after week 1, if he has like 9 targets, everybody is going to be telling you to pick this guy up off of waivers. And right now, like, if there are other guys in your league, the 2 other guys in your league that would be thinking about taking Luke Musgrave, there are going to be guys that are like, I can't carry 2 tight ends because that's lame. That's not what the meta is. Well, the meta is losing. 9 other guys in your league are going to lose. You need to figure out the pathway to be the one guy who wins, and taking a second tight end, if not a first tight end, that's a rookie tight end that's going to potentially lead his team in targets and yards and touchdowns, is probably the way to win your league. So anyway, that's about all I got to say today. I think we're going to talk about the opposite, the inverse of this, when I talk about another target that we have, which is Garrett Wilson, tomorrow.